I never imagined I'd see my wife in the light I did that day. Let me paint the picture because, honestly, if I don't get this out, I might lose my grip. Emma was always the type to have everything in perfect order: her phone, her laptop, her planner. You name it, she had a system for it. Color-coded, alphabetized, and labeled like some kind of hyper-organized machine. I used to joke she could pull off a bank heist and I'd never suspect a thing. Turns out, that wasn't as far-fetched as I thought. It all began on a gloomy Saturday afternoon. Emma had gone out, saying she had errands to run and would be gone for a while. I was just sitting at home, minding my business, when I remembered I needed a document she'd saved on our shared laptop. Since she wasn't around, I figured I'd grab it myself. I thought I knew her filing system like the back of my hand. I was wrong. As I clicked through her folders, I found what I was looking for. But just as I was about to open it, my eye caught something else on the desktop, a folder sitting right between vacation pics and household bills. The name? How to Make a Husband a Cuckold. At first, I froze. Emma had always had a quirky sense of humor, so part of me thought, this has to be some weird joke or article she saved. But deep down, something felt off. My gut twisted as curiosity took over. Against my better judgment, I clicked it open. What I found inside made my blood run cold. Screenshots, notes, messages, draft emails, photos, it was all there. A step-by-step guide, written in painstaking detail, on how to keep a husband completely oblivious. It wasn't some generic advice, it was personal. There were notes about me. One line read, "Make sure he thinks it's just work stress." Another, "If he starts asking questions, call him paranoid." My chest tightened with every word I read, the sick feeling growing by the second. I started scrolling faster, unable to stop, even though every click made me feel like I couldn't breathe. This wasn't some offbeat joke or random article. It was a playbook. A manual. A meticulously crafted guide on how to keep me in the dark. Then I found the messages, texts with someone named Trent. I didn't even know a Trent. But what I saw next hit me like a freight train. The messages were like watching a disaster unfold in slow motion. Flirty banter, detailed plans for dates, inside jokes I'd never heard before. As I read, it became clear this wasn't some harmless flirtation. This was a full-blown affair. They'd been meeting for months, building an entire secret life I knew nothing about. The texts revealed dates to fancy restaurants I'd never been to with her, weekend trips I had no clue about, and even stories about her introducing him to friends, passing him off as a close colleague. Each message felt like a knife to the heart, but the worst part was how she talked about me. She mocked me, my habits, the little things I did for her that I thought made her happy. She described me as predictable, clueless, and easy to manipulate. But the line that cut the deepest? "He's so busy trying to be the perfect husband, he doesn't even notice how much fun I'm having on the side." My heart broke, but I couldn't stop reading. The messages shifted from jokes and plans to graphic descriptions of what they did together. It was like a checklist of their secret life, places they'd go, things they'd do. My chest burned with a mix of heartbreak and fury. All the effort I'd put into being a good husband, into giving her the life I thought she wanted, it all felt like a cruel joke. And worst of all, she wasn't just laughing behind my back. She was laughing at me, with Trent, the entire time. When I'd seen more than I could stomach, I just sat there in the silence of our living room, the sound of rain tapping against the window. I felt detached, like I was watching my own life crumble from the outside. Everything I thought was real had been shattered. After a few minutes, I heard her car pull into the driveway. She walked in, smiling like it was just another ordinary day, her coat soaked from the rain. "Hey," she called out cheerfully. "I brought wine and some snacks. Let's have a cozy night in." Her voice hit me like a jolt, pulling me out of the fog. I waited until she wandered into the kitchen to put everything away. Then I spoke, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "Emma," I began, "where were you just now?" She didn't even look up as she unpacked the bag. "Oh, just running errands. I had to grab a few things for work." The lie came so smoothly, so casually, that for half a second, I almost believed her. Almost. I forced myself to stay calm. "Emma," I said evenly, "who's Trent?" Her hand faltered for the briefest moment before she regained her composure. She rolled her eyes, brushing it off with a laugh. "Trent? Babe, he's just a coworker. Why are you acting jealous?" She smiled, but there was a flicker of something new in her eyes, sharpness, calculation, like she was sizing me up to see how much I knew. I inhaled deeply, steadying myself, and grabbed the laptop. Without a word, I opened the folder and turned the screen toward her. The smile evaporated in an instant. Her face went pale as she stared at what I'd uncovered. For the first time, the mask she always wore slipped, and I could see the raw guilt behind it. Her eyes darted between me and the screen, as though searching for an escape route. The color drained from her cheeks, and she looked like someone caught red-handed at the scene of a crime. I didn't say a word. I just let her absorb it all, the texts, the photos, the absurd how-to guide on deceiving me. My hands were trembling, but I kept my expression firm, waiting for her next move. "Okay," she finally said, drawing the word out, her voice slow and calculated. Then she let out a forced laugh, one that felt like nails scraping across glass. This isn't what it looks like," she said, running her fingers nervously through her hair. She was putting on a show, acting like I was the unreasonable one. "Oh, really?" I replied, my tone cold enough to freeze the room. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're having an affair with someone named Trent. It looks like you wrote a whole manual on how to lie to me. And it sure as hell looks like you're having a great time laughing about it behind my back." She threw her hands up, her laughter turning nervous and high-pitched. No, you're overreacting. Look, Trent's just a friend, okay? And that folder? It was a joke. My friends and I put it together as a funny little thing. We always joke about how clueless men can be. You're taking this way too seriously. Her voice dripped with fake sweetness, but her words didn't fool me for a second. "Emma," I said, keeping my voice calm even though I could feel the heat of anger rising. "If this is a joke, where's the punchline? Where's the part where you tell your friends it's all made up? Because from what I'm looking at, this isn't a joke. It's detailed instructions on how to keep me in the dark." Funny how nothing about this feels like a joke to me. I could see the cracks in her composure now, her panic bleeding through as she grasped for control. "Fine," she snapped, her voice hardening in an instant. "So maybe it wasn't a joke. Maybe I needed someone who actually paid attention to me. Trent listens, understands me in ways you never did. All you do is work and fix things around the house, as if that's all it takes to make a woman happy." I stood there, stunned. There wasn't a shred of remorse in her words, no guilt, no apology. Just defiance, like somehow I was to blame for what she'd done. "I worked to build a life for us," I said, my voice trembling as I fought to keep calm. "I thought we were supposed to be a team." She scoffed, folding her arms across her chest like she'd been waiting for this moment. "Maybe if you weren't so boring, I wouldn't have needed to find excitement elsewhere," she shot back, her words sharp and cold. "I wanted someone who treated me like a woman, not just some item on your marriage to-do list." I felt something inside me break, a sharp snap that shattered the image I'd held of her for years. The woman I'd loved, the woman I'd trusted, was gone. All I could see now was the stranger in front of me, someone cold, callous, completely indifferent to the wreckage she'd caused. "You know what," I said, my voice tight with a mix of anger and heartbreak. "I'd rather be boring and loyal than whatever this is." And if this life is so dull for you, maybe you should go chase your excitement somewhere else. She rolled her eyes, the sneer on her face cutting deeper than any word she'd spoken. Maybe I will, she said, her tone dripping with disdain. It was like I wasn't even talking to the same person anymore. She wasn't the wife I thought I knew. This version of her was colder, sharper, and unapologetically cruel. As I stared at her, the realization hit me like a freight train: this wasn't some mistake, some lapse in judgment. This was deliberate. She'd chosen to hurt me, to lie to me, and now she was mocking me for it without hesitation. She stood there with her arms crossed, meeting my gaze without flinching. The smug, dismissive look on her face was the same expression I'd seen in those texts to Trent, the same attitude that mocked me for trusting her. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore, this was who she really was. I couldn't let it go. I needed to know just how deep the betrayal ran. How long? I asked, my voice heavy with the weight of it all. How long have you been lying to me? She shrugged, her expression completely unfazed. Since the beginning of the year, if you really need to know. And yeah, before you ask, he's been worth every minute. Her words were like a punch to the gut, and her icy smile dared me to react. It wasn't just indifference, it was calculated cruelty, as if she wanted to see me crumble right there in front of her. Why? I forced out, the question scraping against the rawness in my throat. Why go through all of this? Why write out an entire guide just to humiliate me? She laughed, a cold, humorless sound that only deepened the ache in my chest. Oh, come on, she said, shaking her head like I was the one being unreasonable. It wasn't all about you. Trent and I had fun with it, seeing how long it would take before you even noticed. And hey, I guess now we know. Her words cut deeper than anything I could have imagined. It was as if she'd ripped my heart out and turned it into a joke for her and Trent to laugh at. And the worst part? She explained it all with a twisted amusement, like it was nothing more than a harmless prank. You're always so obsessed with doing everything by the book, making sure everything is perfect, she said, her tone dripping with disdain. It's dull, predictable. With Trent, I felt alive for once, like I could be someone else, not just the wife stuck playing house every single day. There it was, the ugly truth behind everything she'd hidden in that folder. This wasn't just an affair. She wasn't just cheating, she was reveling in the deception, thriving on the thrill of turning me into a fool. My love, my trust, it was all just background noise to her twisted game. And yet, some stubborn part of me still couldn't let go. So, what was the plan? I asked, my voice strained, barely able to get the words out. Keep me in the dark until you got tired of him too? She rolled her eyes like I was the one being irrational. The plan, she snapped, sarcasm lacing every word, was to keep my options open. I wanted to see how things played out. Maybe we'd work, maybe we wouldn't. Why should I limit myself? You didn't even know this was happening, so how was it hurting you? Not hurting me? I repeated, my voice trembling with barely restrained fury. Emma, you lied to me every single day. You built an entire relationship behind my back, mocked me to your lover, and you honestly think that didn't hurt me? She shrugged, her indifference cutting deeper than any words ever could. And in that moment, I realized just how utterly alone I was. I stepped back, feeling the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a tidal wave. There was no remorse in her eyes, no flicker of guilt or regret, just irritation that her little secret had been uncovered, as if I'd disrupted her plans. I thought back to the life we'd built together, the house, the quiet evenings, the dreams we'd shared. Or at least, the ones I thought we'd shared. Now, they were nothing but ashes, reduced to nothing by her callous indifference. It felt like waking from a long, comforting dream, only to find myself in the middle of a nightmare. The silence between us was thick and oppressive, the kind that wrapped around you and squeezed. She just stared at me, her expression blank, almost bored. There was no apology, no attempt to make things right, just cold satisfaction, like she'd won some twisted game only she'd been playing. And in that moment, I understood. She expected me to crumble, to plead, to beg for her to stay, or worse, to apologize for not being exciting enough. She wanted me to feel small, like I was the problem. But I wasn't about to give her that satisfaction. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the anger steady me. "All right, Emma," I said, my voice calm but firm. "If this life is so boring for you, let's shake things up. Pack your things tonight and find somewhere else to stay." For the first time, her composure cracked. Her arms crossed tightly over her chest, and her jaw clenched. "Excuse me," she snapped, her voice dripping with indignation. "So that's it? You're just going to throw everything away because I needed something different?" I let out a bitter laugh, the sound harsh and raw in the quiet room. "Throw everything away? Do you even hear yourself, Emma? You've been lying, sneaking around, making me the punchline of your jokes with Trent for months, and you think I'm the one throwing this away?" Her glare sharpened, her eyes flashing with anger. "You know what? Fine," she spat, her voice rising. "I'll leave. But don't act like you're innocent in all this. You're the one who made our life so suffocating. Always planning, organizing, obsessing over the future. You thought just showing up and going through the motions made you a good husband." Her words hit like a slap, not because they were true, but because of the sheer audacity behind them. She wasn't just deflecting blame, she was rewriting the narrative to make her the victim. She wasn't apologizing for her lies, her betrayal, her cruelty. No, she was blaming me for her choices, as if I'd left her no other option but to treat me like a joke. "You think I've just been putting in hours?" I asked, my voice trembling with restrained anger. "For years, I've been building a life with you, making every decision with us in mind, trying to create something real. And you turned it all into a joke, Emma. A damn game." She rolled her eyes, exasperated, as if I was the unreasonable one. "Maybe I didn't ask for all of that, okay? Maybe I didn't want the pressure of being someone's everything," she said, making air quotes around the word, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Maybe I just wanted to feel like me again. And Trent, he made me feel that way." Her words cut deeper than anything I'd ever felt. This wasn't just infidelity. It wasn't just lies. It was a complete dismantling of everything I thought we shared, my love, my loyalty, my belief in us. None of it mattered to her. "You're unbelievable," I said quietly, my voice breaking under the weight of everything. My hands were shaking, my chest tight with a mix of rage and heartbreak I could barely contain. "You've twisted this whole thing in your head to make yourself the victim, like you're trapped in this boring, suffocating marriage. And you really believe it, don't you?" She shrugged, the same cold indifference settling back onto her face. "Think what you want," she said flatly. "I'll find somewhere to go tonight. But don't expect me to apologize for doing what I needed to do." For a moment, I felt like the ground had vanished beneath my feet. Everything we'd built together, our home, our dreams, the life I thought we shared, collapsed like sand slipping through my fingers. The woman standing before me wasn't the Emma I'd loved and trusted. She was a stranger, someone who didn't care about the destruction she'd caused or the pain she'd left in her wake. Without another word, she grabbed her purse and keys, walking toward the door with that same careless confidence. She didn't leave because I asked her to. She left because she wanted to. Because she couldn't be bothered to face the consequences or even pretend to care about what she'd done. And just like that, she was gone. I stood there, alone in the silence of the house we'd shared, the air so heavy it felt like it might crush me. The door hadn't even fully clicked shut, but it felt as if a hurricane had swept through, leaving devastation in its wake. The reality of it all sank in with brutal clarity, whatever we'd had was gone. There was no repairing this. No salvaging it. This was the end. My mind raced as I stood in the wreckage of my life, trying to piece together how I'd missed all the signs. How long had she been seeing me not as a partner, but as an obstacle? A fool she could manipulate while she built a life without me? I replayed every moment, every dinner, every quiet Sunday morning, every time I'd asked her if something was wrong, if she wanted to talk. And every time, she'd brushed me off with that same infuriating word, fine. That word echoed in my mind like a taunt. She'd used it to dismiss me, to keep me blind. Memories flooded in, each one twisting the knife deeper. Like the night I'd asked why she was suddenly working late so often, and she'd snapped that I was being controlling. Or the anniversary weekend she cancelled last minute because she'd forgot she had a work conference. And I, desperate to trust her, had believed every word. I walked over to the laptop, still open to that cursed folder. The words blurred as tears stung my eyes, but I kept clicking, scrolling through the messages, each one a fresh stab in an already gaping wound. I wasn't sure why I kept looking. Maybe some part of me hoped I'd find something that would make this easier to understand. Something that would make it hurt less. But there was nothing. Just line after line of calculated deception, mocking me in plain sight. She hadn't just betrayed me, she'd done it with precision, with intention. And she'd laughed about it the entire time. Then I saw it, a draft email that stopped me in my tracks, dated just 2 days ago. The subject line read, "To-do list." At first, it seemed like one of her typical, hyper-organized notes, but the contents made my stomach drop. It was a checklist: confirm weekend with Trent. Tell him I'm at a work retreat. Make sure he thinks everything is okay. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of that email pressing down on me like a boulder. She hadn't just been careless or impulsive, this was methodical, calculated. Every lie was planned, rehearsed, executed with cold precision. I wasn't her husband, I was just some background character in the little story she'd written for herself. It felt like the walls of the room were closing in. I stood up abruptly, pacing to keep myself grounded. My hands were trembling, the rage inside me bubbling over as helplessness coiled tighter and tighter in my chest. How could she do this? How could she sit across from me at dinner, share a laugh, tell me she loved me, while meticulously planning to rip our life apart? I couldn't stay in that house another second. It felt suffocating, haunted by memories that were now poisoned by her betrayal. Every room held reminders of what I thought was real, and now those memories only mocked me. I grabbed my keys and stormed out the door, not knowing where I was going, just that I couldn't stay. I drove aimlessly, the rain streaking across the windshield, the streetlights blurring into lines of light. The world outside felt as chaotic as the storm inside me. I kept replaying her face as she walked out, cold, indifferent, like none of it mattered. She hadn't even looked back, not once. It was like I didn't matter. Like we didn't matter. Eventually, I found myself in an empty grocery store parking lot. I parked the car and shut off the engine, listening to the steady rhythm of the rain on the roof. The silence inside the car was deafening, pressing against me as if the weight of everything had finally caught up. I felt crushed under the enormity of it all. How had it come to this? How had I been so blind to everything? My mind raced with fragments of memories, sharp, painful, impossible to piece together. I replayed the past few months, combing through every moment, every conversation, looking for the cracks I must have missed. The work trips that seemed to pop up out of nowhere. The phone calls she'd always taken in private. The way she'd suddenly been too busy for the date nights we used to enjoy. And each time I'd questioned it, she'd given me just enough reassurance to keep me from seeing the truth. I could still hear her voice, throwing those accusations at me like they were gospel. You're boring. You're too predictable. It was like she'd written a script to make me doubt myself, to convince me that I was the problem, so she wouldn't have to face the reality of what she was doing. I had trusted her so completely that I blamed myself for every moment of suspicion. I'd questioned my own instincts, told myself I was overthinking things, clung to the hope that we were still the team I thought we were. And while I was working to strengthen our marriage, she was systematically dismantling it, piece by piece. But what twisted the knife the most was realizing just how deliberate it all was. This wasn't a slip-up or a moment of weakness. She had crafted this betrayal with chilling precision. That folder wasn't just a careless mistake, it was a roadmap. Every possible doubt I might have had, every suspicion, she'd planned for it. She'd rehearsed her excuses, tailored her lies, and executed them flawlessly. It wasn't just cruel, it was almost surgical in its coldness. The realization was suffocating. I wasn't just betrayed, I was targeted. She'd put in more effort to deceive me than I'd ever thought possible, all while smiling at me like nothing was wrong. That was the hardest part to swallow. It wasn't just a betrayal of trust, it was a betrayal of everything I thought we were. I closed my eyes and gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Anger surged through me, a storm I couldn't hold back. How could she treat me like this, like I was nothing more than a pawn in her cruel, self-serving game? How could she discard years of love and trust as if they meant nothing? I forced myself to take a deep breath, trying to calm the chaos inside me, but the rage wouldn't fade. It was relentless, roaring in my ears as I wrestled with one pressing question: what was I going to do now? I had choices. I could confront her again, demand answers, unleash my fury on her for every deceitful word and action. Or I could do something smarter, step back, let her think she'd gotten the upper hand, and carefully plan my next move. The idea of her walking away unscathed was unbearable. But so was the thought of wasting another second on someone who had proven so utterly unworthy of my trust. She had already stolen the life I thought we were building together. But she wasn't going to take my dignity. No, that was mine to protect, and I'd make sure she never had the chance to strip it away. The rain continued to patter against the car as a new clarity settled over me. I was done with Emma, done with her lies, her games, her twisted excuses. She could have her little fantasy with Trent, her so-called excitement, and every fake word she'd ever spoken. I wasn't going to cling to something that was already dead. But I knew I couldn't just walk away. Not yet. I needed to end this in a way that left no room for her manipulation, no opening for her to twist the narrative back on me. For the first time that night, a strange sense of calm washed over me. I knew exactly what I had to do. I'd go home, gather every shred of evidence, and call a lawyer. This wasn't going to be a screaming match or a dramatic showdown. No, this would be the cleanest, most precise exit I could make. And when it was over, Emma would learn just how predictable I could be when I was done tolerating her lies. I drove home with a new purpose, the storm outside finally easing, leaving the night quiet and still. The streets were empty, and the world felt oddly silent, as if it too was holding its breath for what came next. When I stepped back into the house, it felt different. It wasn't haunted anymore, just hollow. The illusions she'd crafted here were gone, and all that remained was an empty shell. For the first time in a long while, I could see things for what they truly were. I was done holding on to ghosts. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened the laptop again, returning to that cursed folder. This time, I didn't feel the sharp sting of betrayal or the suffocating weight of grief. I wasn't looking for answers anymore, I was gathering ammunition. Every message, every meeting, every smug detail she had documented was now fuel for my plan. I combed through it all, the receipts for her secret trips with Trent, the fake calendar events marked as work, the checklist of lies she'd so carefully curated. I compiled everything into a single, unassailable collection of evidence. There would be no excuses this time, no hollow apologies. When I confronted her again, it wouldn't be with anger, it would be with the cold, irrefutable proof that this was over. And I'd make sure that when I left, it would sting. Once I had everything, I backed it up to a secure drive. I wasn't taking any chances. If she tried to erase the evidence or twist the story, I'd already be 10 steps ahead. This time, I was in control. This time, she wouldn't be able to spin her lies into some tale of being misunderstood or overwhelmed. She had shown me exactly who she was, a woman who cared only for her own satisfaction, her own thrill. And I was done being the fool who let her get away with it. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the laptop for a moment before closing it. The rain had stopped, leaving the house silent again. But this time, the silence wasn't suffocating. It felt like a clean slate, a new beginning. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure: Emma's hold on my life was over. And when I made my move, she'd finally realized that the game she'd been playing was one she'd never win. Next, I started researching lawyers, jotting down names and numbers. I wasn't entirely sure yet what I wanted from this divorce, but one thing was certain: it had to be clean, quick, and absolute. There would be no drawn-out fights, no room for negotiation. She'd made her choices, and she could live with them, far away from me. Just as I was finishing up, I heard her car pull into the driveway. I didn't expect her back so soon. I figured she'd spend the night avoiding the fallout. But no, she waltzed right in, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors, her expression neutral, almost detached, like she'd just come back from an ordinary day. She didn't even glance my way as she made her way down the hallway. I cleared my throat, and she paused, turning to look at me with one eyebrow raised. "Oh," she said with a shrug. "Still here?" Her indifference was almost laughable. She genuinely thought she could walk back in like nothing had happened, as if she hadn't burned our entire life to the ground. It was absurd, this idea that I'd just roll over, the same predictable husband she'd mocked in her texts. "I'm here," I replied evenly, "just like you're about to be gone, for good." For the first time, her smirk wavered, her confidence faltering. "Are we really doing this now?" she asked, feigning exasperation. "I thought you'd calm down by now. I was giving you space." The audacity of it almost made me laugh. She honestly believed she could brush this off like a minor argument, that a little space would make me forget everything. "Calm down?" I said, my voice steady but firm. "Emma, I've been calm. In fact, I'm beyond calm. I'm done." Her expression shifted, the cracks in her confidence becoming more apparent. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, her voice losing some of its edge. "It means I have everything I need," I said, holding her gaze steady. "Every message, every photo, every disgusting detail. I have your little checklist on how to keep me in the dark. There's enough evidence here to make sure this divorce goes through exactly the way it should, quickly and cleanly. And there's nothing you can do to spin this into anything else." For a brief moment, she was speechless, her mask slipping just enough to reveal the uncertainty beneath. Her eyes darted to the laptop on the table, as if she could see the damning evidence through the screen. Then, just as quickly, her defiance returned, hardening her features like armor. She crossed her arms and scoffed, her lips curling into a sneer. "So what? You're going to throw our marriage away because of a few mistakes?" she said, her tone sharp and mocking. "Go ahead, get your evidence together. See if I care." She lifted her chin, her narrowed eyes challenging me, daring me to flinch. "Emma," I said calmly, refusing to let her bait me, "I'm not throwing anything away. You did that a long time ago. I'm just making it official." She rolled her eyes, but I caught the flicker of panic beneath her forced bravado. "Oh, please," she snapped. "Like you're some saint, always pretending to be the perfect husband, acting like you've never done anything wrong. Maybe if you'd been more interesting, more spontaneous, I wouldn't have needed someone like Trent." Her words were barbed, designed to cut deep, to provoke, to break me. But this time, her insults bounced off. The person she was trying to hurt, the man who had once bent over backward to win her approval, was no longer standing in front of her. She could try all she wanted, but her words had lost their power. I watched her closely as she threw out another venomous remark, but to me, it sounded like static, background noise. She hadn't realized yet that the weapons she'd wielded so effectively before were now dull, powerless. She'd already destroyed everything she could. There was nothing left to hurt. I watched her, calm and steady, as she spewed her venom, each word meant to provoke, to claw at any shred of emotion she thought I had left. But the sting was gone. The person standing before her wasn't the same man who once worked tirelessly to please her, to make our life together feel whole. That man had been stripped away by her lies, her betrayal, her calculated cruelty. And now, her barbs felt as hollow as the promises she'd made. Done? I asked, raising an eyebrow, my voice steady. Because I am. And the sooner you pack your things, the better. Her eyes narrowed, her defiance flickering, but she crossed her arms and leaned against the wall like she wasn't going anywhere. You're unbelievable, she hissed. After everything we've been through, you're just going to throw me out? Like I meant nothing? Like you meant nothing? I repeated, my voice low but resolute. You've spent months proving that's exactly how you see me. You laughed at me, mocked me, built an entire life with someone else while pretending we were in this together. Don't stand there and act like you care now. Her face hardened, but I could see the cracks. She wasn't used to this version of me, the one who wasn't bending, wasn't pleading. For the first time, she was on the defensive, and it showed. Fine, she snapped, pushing off the wall. You want me gone? I'll go. But don't think for a second you're innocent in this. You're so boring, so predictable. What did you expect? That I'd just stay and play house forever? Her words might have stung once. They might have made me second-guess everything about myself, about what I could have done differently. But not anymore. Not now. Emma, I said, meeting her glare, you can tell yourself whatever story you need to feel better about this, but we both know the truth. You destroyed this marriage, not me. And whatever comes next, that's on you. She glared at me for a long moment, the silence thick with tension. Then, with a sharp laugh, she turned on her heel and stormed off to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. This wasn't a fight worth having anymore. Instead, I sat down at the table, staring at the laptop. The folder of evidence was still there, every piece of her betrayal documented in stark detail. It was no longer a source of pain, it was a reminder of why I was doing this. I wasn't fighting for revenge or to prove a point. I was fighting to reclaim my life, to walk away with my head held high. I heard the sounds of drawers opening and closing, the hurried rustle of clothes being packed. Good. Let her leave, let her take her games and her lies with her. She had no place here anymore. When she finally emerged, her suitcase in tow, she didn't say a word. She just stood there, looking at me with that same cold defiance. Maybe she expected me to crack, to beg her to stay, to admit some fault that might absolve her. But I didn't move. I just watched as she walked to the door, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She paused for a moment, her hand on the doorknob. You'll regret this, she said, her voice low and biting. I shook my head, a small, bitter smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. No, Emma. The only regret I have is not seeing this sooner. With that, she opened the door and stepped out into the night, letting it close behind her without another glance. The house fell silent, but for the first time, it didn't feel suffocating. It felt clean. Empty, yes, but in a way that held promise. This was the beginning of something new, something I could build without the weight of her betrayal dragging me down. I sat there for a long time, staring at the closed door, the faint sound of her car pulling away in the distance. And as the silence settled, I felt something I hadn't in months: relief. It wasn't joy, not yet, but it was the absence of pain, the first step toward moving forward. Toward being free. As I picked up the call, Alex's voice came through, urgent and concerned. "Man, where are you?" he asked, his tone serious. "I just got off work, and I had this gut feeling something was up." "You okay?" For a second, I couldn't even respond. Saying it out loud would make it all feel too real. But the fact that someone who genuinely cared was on the other end of the line gave me a momentary sense of grounding. I took a shaky breath. "No, Alex," I admitted, my voice cracking despite my best effort to keep it steady. "I'm not okay. Emma's been cheating on me, for months. And it's worse than that. She didn't just cheat, she planned it out, like it was some kind of game. She wanted me to feel like a fool." There was a pause on the line, and then I heard him curse under his breath. His voice was tight with anger when he spoke again. "You're kidding me. Emma? After everything? Damn, man, I don't even know what to say." "Neither do I," said, feeling the weight of it lift slightly just by saying it out loud. "She was so smug about it, Alex. She acted like I was the problem, like I wasn't exciting enough for her. And when I told her I was done, she flipped it around, acting like I was the one throwing her away." Alex let out a long sigh, his tone firm but reassuring. "Listen to me, man. You're doing the right thing by leaving. You don't need someone who treats loyalty like it's optional. You deserve way better than that. Way better." His words were like a lifeline, cutting through the storm of emotions that had consumed me all night. It reminded me that I wasn't alone in this, that there were people who valued me for who I was, not who they could manipulate me to be. "Thanks," I said quietly. "I'm packing now. I don't know where I'm going yet, but I can't stay here. Not tonight." "Come to my place," he said without hesitation. "Crash here as long as you need. We'll figure everything out tomorrow. You're not going through this alone, bro. I've got your back." Relief washed over me, warm and grounding. For the first time all night, the anger and hurt softened, even if just for a moment. I didn't have to face this entirely on my own. I had people who cared, who would help me find my footing again. "Thanks, Alex," I said, a small but genuine bit of gratitude slipping into my voice. "I'll be over soon." I hung up and finished packing the last of my things with a renewed determination. As I zipped up the suitcase, I looked around the bedroom one last time. It didn't even feel like my space anymore. Every memory we'd made here felt distant and hollow, just shadows of something that had never been as real as I thought. Whatever had made this house feel like home was gone, burned away by betrayal. I picked up my suitcase and headed toward the door. As I passed the living room, I saw Emma standing there, her expression unreadable, her wide eyes tracking me as I walked by. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice wavering slightly. For the first time, there was no defiance, no mockery, just a hint of uncertainty, maybe even fear. I didn't stop. I didn't give her an answer. There was nothing left to say. I opened the door, stepped out into the cold night air, and shut it firmly behind me. The chill hit me instantly, sharp and bracing, but it felt good, like a wake-up call. I took a deep breath, letting the cold sink in, washing away the last remnants of anger and confusion. I was leaving. For good. The life I'd thought I had with Emma was gone, and I wasn't going to cling to the ruins anymore. Out here, away from the suffocating walls of that house, I felt something I hadn't felt in what seemed like forever: freedom. I tossed my suitcase into the back seat, climbed into the car, and sat there for a moment, staring at the dark windows of the house. Part of me half expected her to come running out, shouting some last-ditch attempt to spin this around, to pull me back into her orbit. But there was nothing, just silence. As I drove through the dimly lit streets toward Alex's house, the night's events replayed in my mind like a broken record. Every sharp word Emma had thrown at me, every smug smile, every excuse I'd foolishly believed, it all came rushing back. The memories fit together like jagged puzzle pieces, each one exposing just how deeply she had betrayed me. I couldn't believe how long I'd been blind, how easily I'd let her string me along. The realization made me sick, but it also fueled the determination that kept my hands steady on the wheel and my foot pressing forward. I was leaving her behind, for good. When I pulled into Alex's driveway, I saw him already standing outside, arms crossed, his silhouette tense in the glow of the porch light. As soon as I stepped out of the car, he moved toward me, pulling me into a tight hug before I could say a word. It caught me off guard. We weren't the hugging type, but at that moment, it was exactly what I needed. "She's an idiot," he said, his voice thick with anger as he stepped back. "She had something real with you, and she threw it away for what? A cheap thrill? A laugh? I can't even wrap my head around it, man." Hearing his frustration mirrored my own anger, but it felt different now, less overwhelming. With Alex standing there, it didn't feel like I was drowning anymore. "I don't get it either," I said, shaking my head. "She made me feel like it was all my fault. Like I wasn't enough, like I didn't give her what she needed. And the worst part is, I believed her." Alex looked me straight in the eye, his voice steady and firm. "Listen to me, man. This wasn't your fault. She played with your head, twisted everything to make herself feel better about what she was doing. That's all on her. None of this is on you." His words hit me harder than anything Emma had said all night. He was right. I'd spent so long bending over backward to be the husband I thought she wanted, constantly trying to fix things, to make her happy. But nothing would have been enough, because she wasn't honest, not with me, not with herself. I'd been living in a version of our life that she'd carefully crafted, one that only worked as long as I stayed blind to the truth. "Thanks, Alex," I said after a moment, my voice quieter now. "For letting me stay. For everything." He clapped me on the shoulder, his anger softening into something supportive. "You'd do the same for me. Besides, this is just the start. Tomorrow, we'll get you set up with a lawyer, make sure this whole thing is as clean as it can be. You don't deserve to be dragged through her mess." His words were a lifeline, pulling me out of the wreckage I'd been stuck in all night. For the first time, I felt a sense of direction, a way forward. I wasn't just leaving a house or a relationship, I was leaving behind the lies, manipulation, and betrayal that had consumed me for too long. It wasn't going to be easy, but with Alex's support, I knew I could face it. Later that night, as I lay on Alex's couch staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, the weight of it all finally began to lift. I'd closed a chapter of my life, a painful, bitter chapter, but it was over. And in the quiet of that moment, away from the chaos and deceit, I could almost feel the promise of something new. A blank page, waiting to be written. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to start again. The morning sunlight trickled through the blinds, painting the room with a faint golden hue. For the first time in what felt like forever, I woke up without that crushing weight on my chest. The anger and betrayal were still there, simmering just below the surface, but it felt different, sharper, more focused. I'd made a decision last night, a choice I knew I couldn't and wouldn't go back on. As I sat up, the smell of coffee drifted in from the kitchen. Alex was already there, clattering around in his usual disorganized way. When he saw me, he gave a nod, part supportive, part teasing. "Morning, man. Did you manage to sleep at all?" he asked, pouring me a cup and sliding it across the counter. "Some," I said, taking the coffee and letting the warmth seep into my hands. "More than I thought I would." "Good, because you're gonna need it," he said, his tone shifting to something more serious. "I made a few calls this morning. My cousin knows a lawyer, a good one. She handles this kind of thing all the time." I nodded, grateful for his initiative but already feeling the enormity of what lay ahead. A divorce. Splitting assets. Cutting Claire out of my life for good. It wasn't going to be easy, but if there was one thing I was sure of, it was that I couldn't let Claire twist this into another one of her manipulative games. I wanted it done cleanly. No lingering threads, no drama. Final. An hour later, I was sitting in a modest but professional office across from a lawyer named Linda. Her sharp eyes and even sharper voice told me immediately that she didn't waste time. She flipped through the documents I'd sent her, messages, photos, the damning evidence from Claire's folder, and then set them down with a faint nod. "First off, I'm sorry you're going through this," she began, her tone brisk but not unkind. "But I'll tell you this much, you've done the right thing gathering all of this. It's a solid foundation to work with." I nodded, the sting of those memories still fresh. "I want this over quickly," I said firmly. "No drawn-out fights, no drama. I don't want anything from her, I just want out." Linda raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. "That's a straightforward approach, and I respect it. But I'll be honest, cases like this don't always go smoothly. It depends on how cooperative your wife is. From what you've told me about Claire, I wouldn't bet on her making this easy." Her words hit a nerve, but I kept my composure. "She's not going to make it easy," I admitted. "She'll resist just because she hates losing. But I don't care about the house or the stuff, I just want this over." Linda tapped her pen against her notepad, considering. "That's one way to handle it, but be prepared. In situations like this, when one party walks away, the other often fights harder, not because they want the assets, but because they want control. It's not uncommon for people like Claire to turn this into a game to keep you in their orbit." I took a deep breath, letting her words sink in. She was right. Claire wouldn't take this lying down, not because she cared about me, but because the idea of me leaving on my own terms didn't fit into her narrative. But the thought only hardened my resolve. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. I wasn't giving her any chance to hold on to the strings she'd used to control me. "Let her try," I said, my voice firm. "I'm done playing her games. She can keep the house, the furniture, whatever. I'm not interested in fighting over stuff. I just want her out of my life." Linda gave a small nod, her pen scratching notes onto her pad. "Understood. We'll draft the paperwork with that in mind, but if she tries to push back, we'll be ready. You've got the evidence, and you're clearly motivated to move forward. That's more than most people have at this stage." Her confidence was reassuring. For the first time since everything fell apart, I felt like I was finally taking control. This wasn't just about ending my marriage, it was about reclaiming my life, piece by piece, step by step. "Thank you," I said, meeting her gaze. "Let's get it done." As I left the office and stepped into the crisp morning air, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but at least I was on it now. Every step forward was one more step away from the person who had betrayed me, from the life that had turned into a lie. I was ready to rebuild. And this time, it would be on my terms. Her words echoed in my mind as I let them settle, but they felt weak, hollow, just another attempt to twist the narrative. She could try to spin it however she wanted, but I was done being her fool. "Maybe I focused on the future," I said, my voice steady, because I believed we had one. "I thought we were building something together, but you? You were building something else entirely. So no, Claire, I'm not giving up. I'm finally doing what I should have done the moment I found that folder." There was silence on the line. For a second, I thought she might have hung up, but then her voice came back, cold and sharp. "Fine. If this is how you want it, let the lawyers handle it. But don't think I'll make this easy for you. You want out? Fine, you'll get out, but it'll be on my terms." Her tone carried the same icy, calculated edge that had been present all along, and I knew exactly what she meant. She'd drag this out, fight tooth and nail, do whatever it took to make me pay for leaving. But instead of feeling dread or fear, I felt something else, peace. I was done with her games, and nothing she threw at me now could hurt me the way her betrayal already had. "Do whatever you need to, Claire," I said quietly. "I'm ready for it." With that, I ended the call, letting the silence wash over me. The storm was brewing, and I could feel the battles ahead, but for the first time, I felt prepared. Claire's threats, her manipulation, even her cold rage, they were just echoes now. They couldn't reach me anymore. I'd already been broken once by her lies, but I'd built myself back stronger. I was no longer the man she could control. I stepped back into the house, where Alex looked up from the kitchen table, his sharp gaze immediately searching my face. "How'd it go?" he asked, though his tone already suggested he had a good idea. "She's going to fight it," I said with a shrug. "She'll make it hard for me, drag it out, throw everything she's got at me." I paused, the weight of it settling as I added, "But I don't care. She can fight all she wants, it changes nothing for me." Alex gave a small nod, a hint of pride breaking through his empathetic expression. "That's how you win, man. Not by playing her games, but by refusing to let her pull you into them. Just keep moving forward. You've got this." The next few days blurred together in a haze of meetings, phone calls, and paperwork. Alex stood by me the whole time as I met with Linda, reviewed documents, and started untangling the life Claire and I had shared. With every step forward, every signature, every boundary set, the weight lifted a little more. Each action was a small but meaningful piece of reclaiming myself, my life, and my future. Predictably, Claire retaliated. The text started almost immediately, filled with accusations and venom. At all hours, my phone buzzed with messages about how I was abandoning her, how I was throwing away everything we'd built. She tried every tactic, anger, guilt, pity, but none of it landed anymore. Every word only revealed her desperation, her inability to let go of the control she once held over me. I read her messages at first, each one less cutting than the last. Then I stopped reading them altogether. I didn't need to. I already knew what they would say. She wasn't really fighting for our marriage, she was fighting to stay at the center of my life, to keep pulling the strings even as the threads unraveled. But her desperation couldn't touch what I'd found, peace. For the first time, I saw her clearly. The control, the manipulation, the lies, it was all a desperate attempt to keep me in a story I no longer wanted to be part of. Every angry text, every bitter accusation, was just the last cry of a narrative that had lost its power over me. As I stood in Alex's kitchen one morning, sipping coffee and watching the sunlight filter through the window, I realized something. I wasn't just leaving Claire, I was leaving behind a version of myself that had been shaped by her manipulation. And with every step away, I was finally starting to see who I was without her shadow hanging over me. This was the start of something new. Something real. One evening, as I finished packing the last of my things from her house, I opened a drawer and found a small box I hadn't seen in years. Inside were relics from the beginning of our relationship, a photo from our first trip, a pair of old movie tickets, a crumpled note she'd once left on my car. They felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else entirely. The memories didn't stir the emotions they once did, instead, they felt hollow, disconnected. I realized then that the version of Claire I'd loved had only existed in my mind. The real Claire, the one who lied, manipulated, and betrayed, was someone I never truly knew. No keepsake or nostalgic moment could change that. I closed the box and set it aside, choosing to leave it behind with everything else that no longer served me. Packing up that house was like packing up the remnants of a life I was no longer part of. And with each item I left behind, I felt lighter, more certain of the path ahead. The day the divorce was finalized, Alex insisted we go out to celebrate. We found a quiet bar, and as he raised his glass, a grin spread across his face. "To new beginnings," he said, clinking his glass against mine. "And to freedom from, well, you know." For the first time in weeks, I laughed, a real, unrestrained laugh. I lifted my glass, meeting his toast with my own. "To moving on," I said, letting the words settle in my heart. Each syllable felt like another layer of weight peeling away, another step toward reclaiming myself. As I sipped my drink, I felt the past drift further into the background. Claire's lies, her betrayal, her games, they were now distant echoes, lessons learned but no longer chains holding me back. The wounds she'd left would heal, and though I'd carry the scars, they would no longer define me. I stood there that night, surrounded by the quiet hum of the bar, feeling the promise of something new. The pages of my life were blank again, waiting to be written. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I didn't need to. I was free to face it, one steady, deliberate step at a time. Finally, I was moving toward something real. Something mine.